my goodness. Welcome to More Up North. I'm Shannyn Moore, and I'm so glad you're joining us. I'm really super intimidated about doing this show. I'll just tell you right now. We have two gentlemen fresh off the road show. Yeah, they went and talked to a fancy judge, and then they went and talked to a bunch of people that think they're fancy in Juneau, and well, now they're here to talk to us about, well, HB 110, what's going on in Juneau, oil taxes. I know it's very sexy. We're working on it. So I'm glad you're with us. Pay attention, take notes. There'll be a test at the end. And if you pass the test, you get your permanent fund. That's kind of how that's what we're going to do. We're going to do it that way this time. Do you like that? All right, I thought you would. We'll be right back with More Up North. Best job in the world. Go to the taproot and people clap for you. He's an attorney with Walter and Levesque, whose practice focuses on finance, tax, municipal, and oil and gas law. He represented the City of Valdez before the Honorable Sharon Gleason in the recent trial relating to the 2007 to 2009 assessed value of the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System. Please welcome Craig Richards. And he's been here before. You were actually here first season of More Up North. And he's the owner of Brenna, Bell & Clarkson PC, an Anchorage law firm that emphasizes oil and gas, public utilities, tax assessment, and regulatory law. I told you this was going to be sexy. He represented the Fairbanks North Star Borough and was lead counsel for the municipalities before the Honorable Judge Gleason, aforementioned, in the property case tax concerning TAPs for the same exact years, 2007 to 2009. So these two have been together for well, at least a couple of years now. He, along with Craig Richards, provided riveting testimony over 3 days before the Senate Resource Committee last week in Juneau. I watched it, so you didn't have to, but I'm telling you, it was fantastic television. Please say hello to Rob and Brena. Okay. Oh my gosh, you guys have more education than I've been alive. Between the two of you. I'm very intimidated by this, but when I was watching your testimony and when I saw the Gleason case come out about TAPs and was reading through this, I was like, holy cow, these guys are just a wealth bank of knowledge for Alaskans. And I want to get it into the clear right now because I know that this issue has become very politicized in Juneau. There are campaigns, and there are commercials, and there are conglomerations of people coming together, fighting each other. Ad agencies love it. But this has become so political, and it's something huge right now for Alaska. Why did you decide, Craig, first? Why did you decide this was, other than, okay, this is a case assigned to me, or how did this go?
Well, I think it's in a message that's important to Alaskans. And for instance, I saw in your tagline that your tagline was that you're painting a blue state red one stroke at a time. That was on your website. Red State Blue. Red State Blue,
I
right.
wish.
Right. Well, I'm a Red State kind of guy, so I'm happy with that. But I think that the message that's being delivered, that Rob and I were trying to deliver in Juneau, and that focuses around the debate we're having now in the state, it's not a partisan message at all. It's really about a message as Alaskans that we have to become informed and we have to stand up for ensuring that our public lands are developed in the manner that's in the best interest for the state.
Excellent. And what about you, Robin? I mean, why this case?
Well, this case, like many of my cases, first, I think, and Craig implied this, we're Alaskans. He grew up in Fairbanks, and I grew up in Skagway.
Oh, dear. And I'm from Homer.
Yeah.
And look, we all came here.
Exactly. And so, first and foremost, it's about being an Alaskan and the responsible development of our resources. And we've been involved in those cases concerning those issues for decades now.
Well, it was interesting when you were talking to the Senate. Robin, I don't think that you were meaning to scold them, but it almost it almost sounded that way to me in a way when you said, look, a lawyer from Skagway should know more about this than you. And
shouldn't.
right.
Yeah, no, and that's exactly true. And I believe that a bedrock for sound tax policy in Alaska should be proper information. And the fact that I'm down there testifying before them because I've been involved in litigation involving the Trans-Alaska Pipeline System or other cases, that shouldn't. They're making the policy. They're making a $2 billion decision a year for us, and they should know much, much more than what I've been able to gather, or Craig has been able to gather from just working a few cases up here for a while. So I think it's important that they know.
Well, and I think they know more now that you went and talked to them, except save one that was shopping for shoes on her iPad during the whole thing. Really. But when you were presenting, there were a couple of things. One of the things that you presented that I thought was absolutely explosive was a memo from May 20th, 1977, which I remember. I was in second grade. It was a long time ago. It was a month before TAPS opened, correct? How did you guys get this memo, and what did it say?
Well, I'll let Robin take that because he's the one that got it produced and was not two when it was written.
Well, part of what I've done over the years is litigate what a just and reasonable rate should be for transporting oil through the Trans-Alaska Pipeline should be, and I've represented independent producers and shippers in an effort to get a fair rate through TAPS. And it was part of the discovery in those cases that I found the memo, and what the memo says. It's a strategy memo by BP, and it has a high rate philosophy built into it. It says we should charge the highest rate possible for transporting oil through TAPS because we get to deduct the cost of transporting oil through TAPS from the state taxes.
It was, and maybe that doesn't. To me, it was like, well, that's a no-brainer. But they actually put it on paper. Like, we're going to charge as much as we can to the state so that we can deduct that, correct?
Well, that's exactly right. And the amount that they overcharged above a fair rate was $13.5 billion in 2005 dollars. So,
okay, so
I did a calculation one time over how much bigger our permanent fund would be if they had not done that, and it was at the time, without adjusting for inflation, it was $6 or $7 billion additional revenue at the time. So these kinds of issues, they make a difference in people's lives and in the future of Alaska, and that's the reason that I'm involved.
Okay, we could just end the show right now, because that's like $13.5 billion overcharged. I mean, of course they're going to do that if they can because they've got shareholders. I mean, sharks are sharks, right?
Well, you can't blame a company for optimizing its shareholder wealth. That's its responsibility to do that to its shareholders. So I don't blame the owners for charging as much as they can charge. I think it's our responsibility to fulfill our role as a state, particularly as an owner state, to be sure that regulation works and things are fair, not just for Major Oil, but for independents and for the citizens of Alaska.
All right, so we've figured out $13.5 billion, approximately $6 or $7 billion for the permanent fund that didn't come in. We're going to run to a quick break. We're going to be back with Robin and Craig and ask them more questions, and there is even more explosive information that they were able to give the Senate Resource Committee and have them take that and incorporate it into their decision regarding HB 110. We're going to run to a break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. Welcome back to More Up North. And I have like pages of questions. I know our audience does as well. But one of the things that I keep hearing, and I don't know, maybe it's because they're spending a lot of money on a campaign, but that make Alaska competitive. That we need to be more competitive. Otherwise, North Dakota is going to steal away our boyfriends on the North Slope or whatever. It's crazy, but it seems to me that the way that our tax structure is now, and I'm just a girl from Homer on this, but it seems that it's incentivizing smaller companies like Repsol that just had a blowout. Sorry about that, fellas. Glad none of the 76 people were hurt. Great Bear, there's other people coming in now, which looks like competition, but I have a theory that maybe they just don't want to be competitive. Except, you know, I mean, there's three big ones up there that are saying make Alaska competitive.
Well, one of the strong messages that I tried to deliver to the Senate Resources Committee was that you shouldn't use tax policy to solve the problems of the failed marketplace. That the Alaskan marketplace for exploration and development is dominated by 3 primary producers, and the tax policy needs to recognize that dominance in order to be effective. The particular big 3 producers that we have, some of them are interested in further exploration and development of our resources, and some of which are not. And the major point is that there's a time in the evolution of the field when it's time for the independents to come in, and the major players that built the infrastructure out in the first instance they go into harvest mode, and some of our producers have gone into harvest mode, and we want to be sure that any sort of tax incentive has a maximum impact, and to do that it needs to recognize that we have a closed marketplace.
So is this like we've got 3 big bears and they take down a woolly mammoth and they do their thing at first, right? And then they got other woolly mammoths to get. So the next thing you got is the coyotes, and then you got the birds and the seagulls. I mean, I know I got to boil it down to Shannyn terms, but I mean, that's basically what you're.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah, that's exactly what it's like. Large predators require large prey, and you can't blame them for it. It's the way they survive. British Petroleum, when it closed down its exploration office in Alaska, indicated it needed a field with 1 billion barrels in order to justify their cost structure. That's their role in the marketplace. Well, we need other players in the marketplace, and we need to open up the market so those players can participate meaningfully.
So then why are the 3 big bears still, why are they chasing off, you know, coyotes at this point?
Well, I think that their domination of the infrastructure gives them competitive advantages in the marketplace, and I think that we need to break those down to the degree we can if we're trying to responsibly and optimize our resource development. I think it's time for the independents to come in. I think trying to incentivize a major oil company who's not interested in doing what you're interested in incentivizing them to do, it costs you a whole lot more money to incentivize someone that's not interested than it does to incentivize someone that is. And so I think you need to match up your tax policy with the realities of the marketplace, or you're wasting money.
And giving back money that we don't, if they're not going to do it, is this the tail wagging the dog?
If the marketplace will work, why give tax money away?
Yeah, one thing I realized when I got involved in these tax cases, as Robin said, BP shut down its exploration arm in about 2000. Well, Exxon hadn't drilled a well in the state of Alaska, with the exception of Point Thompson, since early 1980s. So given the position of those 2 players and their development activity in the state, it doesn't make sense to provide tax incentives, at least for those 2 companies, in terms of exploring Alaska's basin and opening up new fields. Now, the tax policy debate with those players at least should be hinging around the current fields that they're trying to develop, and the exploration discussion should be hinged around getting the independents and the smaller predators in to work on the more economically marginal fields.
You know, this whole that I call them bears and you call them predators is going to be taken out of context, I'm sure. You know, the 3 flagrant liberals that are up here. Oh wait, just me. But it seems like if you are taking a position, which you 2 have in your testimony, or that I have in the shows that we've done here, based on talking to people like you, or listening to people like you, you know, you're accused of being anti-development, that you just hate oil companies, that you just want Alaska to, you know, you want to tear down the pipeline and put up yurts or something, right? And nothing wrong with yurts. Don't send me hippie letters. You can't take it. But what is your response to that? Because neither one of you strike me as like, you know, You didn't drive here in a Prius, come on.
Well, I work with Bill Walker. I think you called him Walter earlier. But Bill and I have worked for years to try to get a natural gas pipeline built
I
down
love
the
Bill
Valdez.
Walker.
Everybody loves Bill Walker.
I
He's
love
a great
him.
guy.
Bill Walker, I love you.
And so a big part of my practice is encouraging development, in particular monetizing North Slope gas resources so that Alaskans can enjoy not only the tax revenues from it, but also have cheap energy in the state. And Robin certainly has dedicated his career to independence, getting up here and being able to operate effectively and efficiently.
Yeah, I've worked dominantly within the industry, trying to get the fair opportunity for independence in Alaska.
And you never
that's
saw
difficult.
you never saw any sacrifices or anything going on
No.
with the horrible, mean oil companies. No, I mean, this is really, I think,
Well-
boils back down to, this is about Alaska. This is about our birthright of being an owner state. This is about the commons, and it's not understood by very many people.
And, you know, let me say, this isn't, I don't even have major oil companies and the three major producers have played a significant and important role in the development of our resources, and we should be grateful for the role that they played. And that's been absolutely critical to why we are where we are today. So I don't find fault with them at all, but there is a point in the evolution of things when the tax policy needs to match the realities on the ground. And this particular House bill, I don't think matches the realities on the ground and is incentivizing the wrong group of people with the wrong types of incentives.
And there's a lot of scare tactics, a lot of threats. The pipeline's going to close down. People were still saying that this week. That, oh, if we don't give this $2 billion back to the oil industry a year, then if they're just going to close down the pipeline. My understanding is that if they were going to close the pipeline, they have to take it apart and restore everything back to the way it was, which sounds pretty expensive when there's still billions of, or so much oil reserves known on the North Slope.
The taps will be operating well into the next century, in my opinion. And and one of the messages that I tried to deliver is that, to me, it's an entirely false premise to create a crisis for the purposes of creating a tax policy that may not optimize our resource development. There is no crisis with TAPS. It's not going to shut down anytime soon, and that issue should be taken off the table, and the merits of the tax policies being advanced should be debated on their own merit rather than under a false crisis.
Right, a hostage situation. Thanks for putting it that way. We're going to run to a break. We're going to be right back, and we're going to talk about another memo that came out in 2004 from BP. Pretty interesting. We'll be right back. Oh, my goodness. Welcome back. Robin Brenna, of course, is here, and Craig Richards, and we're talking about, well, what I really want to do was, last week we talked about being an owner state, and it was a great show to sort of celebrate something about us that's different. And then to this week say, look, here's an issue that is so important. Please educate yourselves and don't be afraid when a lot of money is being thrown out there to tell you that something that's not true. I mean, I think it's pretty easy to say, TAPS isn't in danger of closing down, in the next 5 years, like we've been hearing testified. It's crazy. But there was a memo that came out, and maybe you can tell me how you got this one as well, from 2004. That was from BP. And that was yours as well, Robin?
Yeah, it was, and I'm involved for some independence in cases before the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission concerning TAPS and what the proper rates should be. And the 2004 memo was a memo the TAPS owners just did strategic reconfiguration. They put about $700 million into revitalizing TAPS. And the memo concerned strategic reconfiguration, but in it stated what the role of the Alaskan assets was for BP. And, to BP's credit, they haven't made any secret about what their position is or what the role of the Alaskan assets are. And so I just brought forward a memo that said what that is, and they've said it several times when they for example, when they shut down their exploration office. And what the memo said was is that the role of the Alaskan assets was to produce a steady revenue stream so that BP could explore in other markets. And so it's a cash cow. Alaska is a cash cow, and that's its role in BP's portfolio, and that's what the memo stood for. And there's no secret about that, and that's what BP has done.
Well, and the next thing that the memo went on to say was not just that it's a cash cow, but accepting the logic of the cash cow, the way BP should treat its Alaska assets is to focus on improving its margins. I mean, this is, Rob and I both been to business school. This is standard behavior when you're at the cash cow stage of any sort of product, that you're making a lot of money and you focus on efficiencies and improving your margins. And one of the things when you're an oil company you can do is you can make a lot more money when you're paying 70% marginal tax rates, lobbying taxes, than you can drill in a well. There's more money to be made in margin improvement on your tax structure than about any other area because they are such a heavily taxed industry. And so BP's strategy to me follows very logically to where they are in the course of the fields.
So they can make more money right now sending lobbyists to Juneau to buy $14.99 lunches than they can exploring?
Well, they pay billions of dollars in taxes, and they make billions of dollars. If they can get, a theoretical $2 billion a year in state taxes reduced to one, they just made $1 billion without drilling a single well.
Well, and let me say this somewhat differently, that they are not exploring. And if what we need is exploration, then we need to incent the people who are willing to explore. And two of the big three are not exploring and haven't, by and large. There's a few exceptions out there, but so if we want to link our future, we want to link it to someone, to producers that aren't in harvest mode for our assets, but are in exploration and development mode so that we can optimize our resource development.
Right, we need to bring in more coyotes.
We do.
Because the bears have been hibernating for a while, is what you're saying?
The prey that the bears live on are no longer in the field, and now it's important for the next generation to come in and do what it does in the cycle.
This is so interesting. I didn't realize that they're really just not that into us. I mean, we're just really not that hottie. They're going to move on. They're going to move on to a younger woman, not to be bitter on the week of Valentine's Day.
I think they're into making as much money as they can off the existing elephant fields that they're developing. I mean, BP has a world-class asset at Prudhoe Bay, Alpine Park. These are all great fields with, as Robin said, maybe even a century of life left, and they're going to make as much money off it as they can. That just means that they're not as interested as other players might be in going to the satellite field next door and drilling that because
it's
cold. It doesn't have the same margins.
It's cold.
If you want to get a job done, find the person that's most willing to do it. And that person will cost you the least and do the best job. That's all I'm saying.
Yeah. And there are companies really willing to be here and do this right now, correct?
There are, and they have barriers to entry that the state needs to focus on and resolve for them. Access to field facilities, fair transportation rates, and a way to get their oil off the North Slope through tankers. These are important barriers to entry to independence that are keeping our market closed. If you compare our market with the other market that it's getting compared with, North Dakota or the Gulf Coast or even the Cook Inlet, what you see is very active marketplaces that have lots of market participants. The Alaska North Slope is compared with any other marketplace like North Dakota, there are hundreds of shippers. Right. There are marketers, there are resellers, there's an entire vibrant off of a basin that's much less productive than this basin. What we need to do is open up our marketplace, allow our marketplace to work, and we need to and it would be helpful to do that, to know what the marketplace can do before you start talking about giving taxes to people, giving tax breaks to people that aren't interested in the development of our resources.
So you guys were just in Juneau, and they've showered, don't worry, you won't catch anything. But what was the feel down there for you guys? Like, did you feel like they were receptive to listening to this? Because there is such a push. The House just passed this last year, HB 110. They were like, oh, really? Cool. Money to oil companies? Okay, yes. And then the Senate was called the Do Nothing Senate by the governor for asking questions. and trying to delve into this a little bit more. I think between your testimony, Pedro Van Meer's, some reporting from Dermot Cole, and a few others, it really has shown that that do-nothing Senate potentially kept something, you know, wasteful from happening.
Well, I don't like to refer to them. You asked about, I thought that the Senate Resource Committee, to a person, was respectful and asked good questions. And I appreciated their questions, and I thought they were listening to the answers. You know, we're not, the bottom line here is that if you're going to fashion tax policy in Alaska, you need the information that you need in order to make prudent decisions about what the tax policy should be. And that requires a series of steps. And the first step is to be sure that the market works. And the second step is to be sure you have the information that you need to do the job. And the third step is to be sure that you're incentivizing the people that are trying to do the job that you want done. Those are important steps.
Did you get a chance to talk to the governor?
I did not on this trip.
I've never spoken with the governor.
Really? I'll talk to him right now. Wait a second. Parnell, you really should sit down with these guys. I think they know what they're talking about. It's a good idea. We're going to talk to them some more after this break. We'll be right back. Welcome back. So glad you're joining us. A quick question for you, Craig. My understanding is that when an oil company, but when I say it's my understanding, I could be wrong, but I think this is right. When somebody takes a lease out, right? Say one of the big three gets a lease. Isn't that an agreement that they're going to develop if there's a reasonable profit? I mean, like, I'm going to get this lease. If there's a reasonable profit, then I'll do it. Like, why, if you didn't already figure out that there was a reasonable profit, why the hell would you get the lease?
Well, that's one of the issues that has bothered me about watching the debate from afar in Juneau, is I've heard the argument several times that the big three can make more money on their investment dollars in, say, another project around the world than they can in Alaska. And the suggestion is that they might be foregoing otherwise profitable investment in Alaska because they can make more money somewhere else. And,
which we can't control that.
Well, we can control that because part of an oil and gas lease, the state is a landowner. We're not just the government. We have leased the land and given the opportunity to a company to develop our land. And that comes with rights and obligations. And one of the obligations as an oil and gas lessee that you have in America is if there is a project that you have a reasonable expectation of profit on, you're required by law, by the contractual obligations in the lease to undertake it. And the express purpose of this is to prevent an oil and gas company from not developing rancher land A and developing rancher land B when both are profitable because he has limited capital and can only do one project. The law requires that oil company to go out and get all of the money he needs to be able to undertake all profitable development activities he has in all of his leases.
So, the long and the short of it is they're not exactly living up to their leases.
Well, the long and short of it is if any oil company on any lease in the state of Alaska says, I'm not going to develop a project that's profitable because I can make more money somewhere else, the state, like any contract holder, needs to get in there and enforce its rights and not allow that kind of behavior, not give away tax dollars to try to get them to do something they're already contractually obligated to do.
Parnell? Yeah, well, I don't have a lot. I don't have this like fantastic hope that Parnell's going to be like, all right, fellas, and go all Wally Hickle on them.
Well, I think the state has started the idea of enforcing its rights as a landowner through the Point Thompson dispute, and it certainly would be my hope that we would continue to demand maximum development from that resource and all of our other resources. So I think at least in the near past, the Department of Natural Resources has made some important steps forward in enforcing our rights.
Well, I guess it's up to us, though. I mean, it's up to Alaskans. We really have to hold our leaders accountable. I mean, this is our resource. I mean, I know it's hard because American Idol's on or whatever, but I really want people to dial in. Questions from our audience. We have so many that I thought we'd take them early this week. Have the big three denied access to taps to independent producers? And wasn't the cost of building taps already paid for by Alaska's oil? Two separate questions.
They have not denied access. They're a common carrier, and they have an obligation to carry. They have adopted a maximum tariff rate policy, which has, I mentioned earlier, resulted in $13.5 billion of overcollections. And they have certain provisions in their tariffs that make it harder for independents to go into business here. For example, they have they require penalties if your oil sits in Valdez for too long. If the three of us drill a hole and get some oil out of it in the North Slope, and we're sending down 2,000 or 3,000 barrels a day, our oil is going to need to sit in Valdez long enough to get a tanker to come up and haul it away. So under that circumstance, that if there's so much utilization at the Valdez Marine Terminal, then we would have to pay penalties in order to accumulate our oil to the point to make it commercially viable. So they put in place little barriers, and they put in place huge prices, and they've operated the pipeline in a fashion that gives them a competitive advantage in the marketplace. And it's not just taps, it's the field facilities as well. We have people, independents, having to build pipelines right next to pipelines that are half empty. You know, and those are barriers to entry. We have people that even if we did get our oil, how are we going to get it out of Alaska, on whose tanker are we going to ship it on? So there's a series of things that just kind of stack the deck, and that's the reason why you don't see the level of activity up here that you see in other marketplaces, or for that matter, even in the Cook Inlet.
Well, and you know, if BP is paying BP to put BP's oil in BP's gas line or in the pipeline, they can charge whatever they want because they're taking it out of one pocket and putting it in the other one.
It doesn't really have much economic consequence to them, particularly when it comes to profit, because one BP subsidiary paying the other BP subsidiary whatever profit, the higher their profit. But for an independent, that's a real cost,
right?
And it hammers them. And it has in the past. You may recall that Milne Point, when Conoco was first up here, before they came back and operated as an integrated line, they gave up on Milne Point because of the high tariff rates.
And the other question, wasn't the cost of building taps already paid for by Alaska's oil?
The taps cost $8 billion to construct, and that was included in the rate base, and that rate base has been recovered and deducted from the taxes, and it's been so yes is the short answer to that.
All right, we've got tons more questions. We're going to run to a quick break. We'll be right back with our guests and hopefully some answers. We'll be right back. Welcome back. I've got my two phone-a-friends right here. Question number one, how does Alaska insist, underlined, that we get to learn the results of the 2010 open season?
Well, I think AGEA was crafted in such a way, unfortunately, that that's going to be pretty much behind closed doors until something happens, which doesn't look like it's going to be anytime soon.
The broader question that raises is transparency. And we are an owner state. This is our oil. This is the development of our resource. And what information should we have as citizens of Alaska and our legislators have in framing tax and other policies? And that goes to the quality of information that they receive. And we think, I believe that it needs to be the workings of the oil industry in Alaska needs to be much more transparent so that we can ensure that sound policies are being made.
Yeah, and I think that we all really want that, and unfortunately we've fallen for people just saying open and transparent. And you know, Sarah said that a lot, and she couldn't be transparent in a saran wrap bikini, and I don't think Sean Parnell can be either. I mean, there's too much incentive to not let people have the information.
Well, you know, one of the things that, if you do securities law, a famous quote by Justice Brandeis is that electric light is the best policeman, sunshine is the best natural disinfectant. The idea being if you have open government policy and people can see the information that is going into governmental decisions, that you tend to not only have transparency in the decisions being made, but you get better results. And the state of Alaska has chosen to not provide information that the oil companies provide, for the most part, to the Department of Revenue publicly available. First, the department doesn't try very hard to get good information, but then when that information is provided, it's the department's policy to keep all of that information essentially under seal, and that results in a situation where the legislature and the public don't know the basis of a lot of the Department of Revenue's decisions, and they don't know that the Department of Revenue is making decisions based on the best available information.
Well, that sounds like it's bad for us.
Yeah. Well, I think if someone comes to you and asks for $2 billion a year, I think you ought to be able to ask them for some information that you need in order to be sure that you're making the right decision. And to me, if they don't give it to you, that ought to be dispositive of the issue.
Right, whether it's 2 million or 2 billion. And in this case, it's bigger, yeah, absolutely. If there are 3 big producers on the North Slope, does that give them a non-competitive advantage over smaller producers? Yes, it does, obviously. When are we going to find leaders in Juneau who tell the big 3 to allow other companies to use the infrastructure on our land or hit the road?
I think it's absolutely essential. I do not fault any of the big 3 or any oil company for the way they do business or their efforts to try and maximize their shareholder value. That's their job. But we have a job too. We have a job as citizens, and the government of Alaska has a job as a state. And we need to be sure that we resource the effort properly to create the proper policy and get the proper information, so that we protect the interest of the citizens of Alaska, and that's what they should focus on.
And the state shouldn't just act as a state. The state needs to act as a landowner, because at the end of the day, it is the state's resource that's being held to trust for the people that's getting developed. And if the state doesn't come in and aggressively demand development and stand by its contractual rights, no one is going to, because there's no private individual that has the ability to make the lessees do what they should on their leases. So ultimately, it's incumbent on the Department of Natural Resources and the executive branch to demand that their rights are seen to.
So basically, okay, so in North Dakota, which we get compared to a lot, if oil company goes in there and they're like, okay, they get a lease from somebody, right? They have to pay the state, they have to pay the feds, and then they got that owner of the property who's going to be like, hey, I'm not getting you checks because I sold you this lease and you're not drilling. Get out there and drill. Otherwise, I'm going to find somebody else. In Alaska, we don't have that landowner. We are that landowner. Right. And they need to be the one. You're right. There's like more than one. We have as a state, we've got a bigger job to do than North Dakota when it comes to developing oil, correct?
Right. We have to behave not only as the regulator, the governmental entity overseeing development and the taxing authority, we have to behave as the self-interested and self-motivated landowner that wants to make as much money off our resources as possible.
And we need the information necessary to know whether there's a reasonable expectation of policy from those efforts. And we can't sit in the dark and not know whether or not our own resources are economic to develop while negotiating tax policy.
And really, at the end of the day, what we're talking about is roads, education, healthcare, infrastructure, jobs. I mean, that's. I'm sorry, we're over an oil barrel, so to speak. 92% of our expenses are paid for by oil, and so knowing these things are essential. We've got to run to a quick break. We've got more questions. We'll be right back with our panel. Okay. Oh my gosh. All right. So questions in very fancy script writing. I'm not going to analyze it for you on the show. Why do I think Governor Parnell? Yeah, and Republicans in the legislature don't get that we should let the marketplace work for us. A couple of things on this. Sean Parnell is an oil guy. He was an oil lobbyist. He still is, as far as I'm concerned. But when you say Republicans in Juneau, there are some tremendous Republicans who are very much taking to heart what the owner state is. Gary Stevens, Bert Stedman, in the Senate, for instance, Paul Seaton in the House. I do not think that this is a partisan issue. We have a very partisan governor, but that's just my take on it. You red tide folks don't have to answer if you don't want to. But.
Well, I'm happy to. To me, this isn't about Republicans and Democrats. This is about the optimal development of our resource, the responsible development of our resource. I think Parnell and the Republicans there do get it. I think that we're coming from slightly different perspective than they are, and I've had Governor Parnell's support in very important situations that I think he stood up for the interest of Alaska. So I'm not here to bash Governor Parnell or to bash Republicans. I think this is a citizen of Alaska issue, and I think that Governor Parnell and the Republicans and the Democrats in Juneau would agree that we need information necessary to have a proper tax policy, and that we need to know what we're buying before we buy it, and we need to be sure that the open market is permitted to work, and I think that they have taken steps to open up the market, and the Cook Inlet's a good example of that.
Who do you think crafted HB 110?
I don't know.
Because they don't have, it couldn't possibly have been someone working for the state of Alaska that has the kind of information that you do.
Yeah, I don't know the specific answer as to who the original drafter of that bill was.
Why is Alberta market considered a good option when it costs more to get it there than the marketplace?
So I don't think right now anyone is looking to aggressively, except for TransCanada, going to Alberta anymore, at least for natural gas, given the shale gas revolution has made U.S. natural gas prices the lowest they've been on a real basis in years.
And the drinking water is fantastic now. Thanks, fracking. Right. Many people define infrastructure as only roads and dams. How do Alaskans convince our legislature that the gas pipeline to be considered a road to market? The roads to resources, would a gas line be, maybe it should be considered that?
Well, my personal view is that what's holding up gas pipeline development more than anything else is a refusal by the particular Prudhoe Bay leaseholders to sell gas or to agree to ship it. And at the end of the day, that's not the state as a government, that's the state as a landowner, as we've talked about, that has to step up and say, look, those are my resources, I want to make money on them, and you're either going to ship them down a pipeline that we choose, or we're going to take our leases back.
What are the chances of that happening?
Well, I hope good, because otherwise we're not going to have a natural gas pipeline.
I think that's what it would take at this point.
I think, too, it's important. The power of the big three is, the raw power is very well illustrated in the fact that an entire gas basin with huge resources is not being developed in part because they want to change in oil taxes, which isn't related to the gas issue. And that's what happens in a closed marketplace when you give that kind of power to a few market participants. And were we to open this up, we would strengthen our negotiating position with all the market participants.
What is your feeling about how Norway does theirs? They compete. They're a developer. They have their own company, and they compete with Exxon and BP and Conoco and all the same people we've got here. And now they're actually doing business in Alaska. What are the chances that Alaska could ever have its own Alaska company?
Well, my personal view is that we should start an oil and gas development company, if not to even undertake development activity, but to at least get a seat at the table when decisions are made and to get the best information. If the state were to develop an oil and gas company, it would be years before it had the technical expertise to do development. But at least as a 5 or 10% holder in some of these leases, it would be at the table and be part of that decision-making process, rather than being on the outside hoping decisions are made in our interests.
So we could be a coyote on the woolly mammoth scraps. Thanks for the scraps, stupid.
Craig and I may not see eye to eye entirely on this issue. It makes me nervous when you talk about state government doing
having a barley farm,
doing certain types of things. But I do think that the state has a role to play, and it's as a resource owner. So it's exercising its police power as a state, as well as as the owner of the resource. And there is no time when a state's power is greater than when it's developing its own natural resources. So I believe that the state has tremendous power, and certainly the power necessary to ensure transparency, to ensure that these kinds of projects get done, and to guarantee that the information that they need is provided to them so they can make sound policy.
Excellent. Thank you both so much. The hour has flown by. We'll be back next week with more Up North.